Hello and welcome to the Pwn School Project. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. We have a special guest tonight that I'll be bringing on here in just a second. Carlos, he's one of our Pwn School members that attends the meetings in Denton, which we just recently started back. Since the lockdown and places not letting you meet, we haven't been holding meetings, but we had one in Denton this past Monday, and so it was awesome of Carlos to offer to do the walkthrough. I had a couple of people I talked to; they weren't sure where they could speak, so this works out really good. It's something different, and everyone enjoys the walkthroughs. We had David a few months back that did a walkthrough, and so this should be a lot of fun. So thanks everyone for joining. He's actually going to be hacking something on Proving Ground, and someone had mentioned quarter jack. So that's what he'll be working on tonight. So thanks everyone for joining. We appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Carlos on. Hey, Carlos, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Glad to join you all. So how's this work? You want me to just kind of get right into?
Sure. If you want to tell people a little bit about yourself before we
Yeah,
get started.
yeah, sure, absolutely. So my name is Carlos Gonzales. I currently work at Verizon doing penetration testing, doing all internal penetration testing. So working on some of our internal systems and that kind of a thing when people have new projects or projects that just need to be revisited a little bit. I kind of got into penetration testing as a little bit of a series of happy accidents. I feel like I used to actually work in a different network troubleshooting organization. Ended up being a manager there, and one of the technicians on my team told me a little bit about this certification exam he took called the Certified Ethical Hacker, and I was just like, "Ooh, what's that?" Right? And so that piqued my interest, and I was like, I feel like at the time, security stuff really interested me, but I didn't really know there was much of a formalized process behind a lot of this stuff. So that definitely interested me. I was working on my bachelor's degree at the time, so I finished that up. And as soon as I finished that up, I took a course for CEH, took and passed the certification exam, and then took Security Plus as well, and then actually made my move into the vulnerability management team at Verizon, and then from there moved over to penetration testing eventually. So it's been really fun. Learned a whole lot of stuff along the way. Also got a couple of SANS certifications related to penetration testing, the GPEN and for general penetration testing, and GWAPT for specifically web application penetration testing. So, I feel like it's hard. You feel like you see always what you have to learn, because there's a whole lot, but it's been fun anyway. Just doing all that stuff. So yeah, so nice to meet you all. I'd certainly like to hear any questions you guys have along the way as we're going through this, because I already did the box, so this presentation is not for me. It's for you guys to hopefully pick up some new things along the way. So please, I'll try to keep an eye on chat. I haven't really done this before, so I'll try to keep an eye on it.
Yeah,
But
I'll kind of field chat for you, so the questions come up
yeah,
that
yeah.
way you don't have to worry about it. And
Okay, cool,
I
cool.
can actually, when we get the questions, I can actually show them up on the screen like this. So even too, so
Okay,
that way.
perfect. All right,
But yeah, that's
so
pretty cool. We have something in common. I used to work at Verizon too. Verizon was my first pen testing job.
oh, cool,
I worked
nice.
in their consulting division there at Verizon,
Oh, okay,
and I
cool,
got
yeah.
my GWAP through Verizon. They let me take that course through SANS. This is my first SANS course, so I took that
Mm,
there. So yeah,
yeah, yeah.
we paid for my GWAP certification.
That definitely helps because those SANS courses are not cheap. So so I'm very happy to have that paid for.
When I took my first one, is like five grand, and they're up to like have they gone past 7,000 yet? Because in the last year it was 7,000. I don't know if they've gone.
Yeah, they're about there, about
Yeah,
7,000 per course. It's a little steep. So
yeah.
yeah, definitely glad to not have to pay for that myself.
Definitely the people that create the courses and stuff are some of the best in the industry, and it's
Hmm.
the people working on it. It's not just someone you're not aware of or whatever, but so good quality content from good smart people.
Hmm.
So if you want
Yeah.
to, you can take it away and share
All
your.
right. Cool, cool. So let me share my screen here real quick. Okay, so right now, you guys should see, yeah, it looks like on the stream it's showing what looks like a, if you guys played Overwatch at all, you might recognize Sombra's little icon there. So hopefully that shows up properly. All right, so I am running, I'm using Parrot OS. It's very similar to Kali. If you guys have used Kali in the past, really the end goal is the same. Have a distribution with a whole lot of penetration testing tools already built into it. So the reason I chose Parrot not too long ago instead. Well, first my Kali VM was giving me a lot of troubles for some reason. Second, and more importantly, there's a very, very vital reason is by default, the terminal window in Parrot is more colorful. So I was like, hey, you know what? I'll just go with that. So very, very important technical reasons here. Obviously, you can really recolor and all that, but you know, I redo VMs all the time, so I don't feel like messing with that. Okay, so first, you know what? Let me show you guys real quick. The Proving Grounds interface is where you kind of select your machines and you start them up, and you'll see Crackerjack is started up, and I've got an IP address. Yay! All right, so we should be all good to go there. If you guys have worked on, so I don't know what kind of experience everyone has, so I'm just going to go through at least a brief explanation on some of the things that someone new to security might not be familiar with. Certainly let me know if you want me to pick up the pace more, or if you want me to explain more, that's cool too. So in most penetration tests, the first thing you'll probably do is an Nmap scan. So Nmap does things from ping scanning, so scanning a range of IP addresses, to port scanning, which is scanning the individual ports on one machine or multiple machines to see what services are running or running scripts, and it has a whole lot of other features. And I just saw a question, is the Proving Ground machine on Hack the Box? So Proving Grounds is actually, maybe I should explain that. Proving Grounds is actually a different service offered by Offensive Security, the same company that provides like the OSCP certification and that kind of a thing. They do, it's similar to Hack the Box in that they provide intentionally vulnerable machines that you can work on and hack away to your heart's delight. So same principle, just happens to be a different environment. So that's it. There are a couple key differences, I feel like, or maybe some differences in flavor I've noticed along the way, and I'll kind of point those out as I go along explaining the stuff in the machine. So real quick, then back to Nmap. So Nmap is kind of your first stop for just about any test. If you guys have used it before, there's a whole lot of options. If you just type in Nmap at the command line, you'll see 1.5 million options. There's a one, I typically will go for something like -A, which runs a whole bunch of options like OS enumeration, safe scripts, and that kind of a thing. I will run -P0-, which means it will scan all ports from 0 to 65,535. As you can imagine, right now I'm running a whole bunch of enumeration and scripts on 65,536 ports, I guess. Those tests can take a while, even on one machine, so be aware of where you're running it and how long it's going to take and that kind of a thing. And then, after that, you just have the IP address of your target. And so a question on how much the machines cost. I think Proving Grounds is about $20 a month, just so you know. They do have a free tier. The paid for tier is actually machines made by the offensive security staff. So I think that's kind of cool, especially if you're looking to possibly take the OSCP exam, like I'm kind of trying to prepare for in the relatively near future. I feel like it might be handy to have an idea of how they build their machines and kind of what they look for and that kind of a thing. And like Hack the Box, they do have walkthroughs. So obviously you want to try it yourself first, and then once you kind of find that point of diminishing returns, I guess, of where I'm just wasting time here, hitting my head against a wall, then take a peek at the walkthrough. The way I typically go about it is I take a look at as little as possible, just to nudge me over the next step, and then like, okay, cool, then try again until I hit a wall, or hopefully kind of overcome everything there. So then going back to Nmap here, and sorry, I have a lot of notes here that I'm going to be kind of talking through as we go through it. I wanted to make sure I had all the options. So Nmap-A for all those scripts, OS enumeration, -T4 just to make it faster. Depending on your environment, you may not want to run something like a -T4. It makes it run faster, a little more aggressively, but know your target, right? In this case, it's against the test target. Worst case scenario, I knock it over and I can restart it, no problem. In Proving Grounds practice in particular, the box is only for me. So if I knock it over, literally no one is affected but me. So it's okay. I can play kind of fast and loose with it. The IP address of our target, and then I just save it to a file called nmap_all_p, just so I have that output. So Nmap has a lot of output with this because, again, it's running scripts like FTP scripts. It's trying to log in, for example, saying, hey, did you know you can log in to FTP anonymously here, for example, and some other things related to SSH, identifying some things. Some of this information is pretty helpful. Some of it might not be so relevant to your test. It really depends. And then you go from there. So like I said, this test takes a while. I didn't copy here how long it took, but a lot of times tests like this can take 5 or 6 minutes. I don't want to have you guys hanging around for 5 or 6 minutes while I look at the screen. So I have the results here, but I also have a kind of condensed version of those results as well. So let's take a look at those real quick, and that's here. So I have a bunch of ports here, and I have it all color coded, and I'll get to that in a second. But I have things like, all right, 21 is running FTP, and it gives me the version. 22 SSH. Usually SSH is not better screen resolution. All right, let me zoom in a little bit more on this, and hopefully that'll help a little bit. And let me know if you guys need it any bigger, and I'll try to adjust it. Okay, so SSH is usually not the way in. I found, at least in the stuff I've encountered with Hack the Box, and so far with Proving Grounds, but always worth taking a look at that as a possible avenue if it seems like that might be it, or if you have ran out of other options. On port 80, we're running HTTP, an Apache HTTP server, 111 RPC bind. I find that usually never leads me to much of anything either. SMB running on 139 and 445 as usual. So Samba specifically in this case, so we know that this is some sort of Unix-based system. 3306 running MySQL, and then 8081 running another HTTP server. Okay. And then this, so a couple things here. So first of all, so I said I would kind of touch on some of the differences I've seen, at least with between Hack the Box and Proving Grounds. Is one thing in Proving Grounds, I've seen a lot of dead ends. So a lot of dead ends, and in that, like, for example, all these ports here that I've highlighted in pink, in the end turned out to be stuff that was irrelevant to me exploiting the box. So that can be kind of frustrating at times when you're going through the process of working on the box, but that's also kind of realistic, right? Because you don't always know exactly, you don't always have a set path when you're working on a real pen test. Second, so these things, the only thing that ended up really being relevant for me was port 8081, which was that second web server we have running, and I'll show you why in a second. And then, but another thing I thought was interesting, and something just to double check when you're working on your tools, is that although, so I had Nmap running scripts to try to identify the OS, and in this case, it said, hey, the host name is Crackerjack, the OS is Unix, so some sort of Linux-based system, perhaps, right? Then for SMB, it said, hey, this is Windows 6.1, which, if you look up Windows 6.1, actually that is Windows 7, what us consumers know as Windows 7. And that is kind of confusing, isn't it? So I know from the other things that this is actually a Unix-based system. And so that's helpful to know, but just something to keep in mind, that sometimes your tools may lie to you. Maybe not intentionally, but something might come up a little bit differently, and so you just need to be aware of that. So let's take a look at, for example, port 80 always is, there's is always a promising way to go because, hey, it's a web port, right? So let's take a look at that. In this case, our target IP address is this one here. I have in the terminal window 192.168.75.57. And sorry, that might be a little small for you guys to see, that text at the bottom there, but that's not really too important to what I'm doing here. So we're just going to go to, just go to the IP address and see what's here. And this is really not all too interesting. It's just a default Apache page saying, hey, it's working. Like, okay, great, So that doesn't tell me a whole lot. So now, when I run across something like this, I might run something similar to FUF or dir search or dir buster or something like that. So they all really do the same thing. They try to brute force directories or files on the web server to show you kind of stuff that's on there. If you haven't used those tools before, they're really fun. They take a while depending on the word list you're using. So just be aware again of, how much time do you really want to take on it? Do you want to be super extensive, or are you okay with kind of a light view of that? And I think I tried in this case. Did I? Yeah, so I tried actually FUF. So it stands for Fast Fuzzer, you fool. I tried FUF using the directory list 2.3 medium.txt. If you guys have done a lot of Hack the Box, you've probably seen this specific directory list quite a bit. And I ran FUF with a few options looking for text files, PHP, HTML, recursive search. So when it finds a directory, it's going to look inside that directory. Okay. I think my mic just turned off. Sorry about that, guys. I think I'm back on. So, all right. So FUF found a whole lot of stuff, and it ended up not being too relevant for what I was doing. So I was like, okay, well, none of this is telling me much right now, at least. So I went back and looked at. Actually, let's backtrack a little bit. So this was port 80, but Nmap also showed that there was a port 8081 that was open, and that was this one here. So first I get a bad request. Hey, you're sending a request speaking plain HTTP to an SSL enabled port. Okay, all right, so let's fix that real quick with an HTTPS. And okay, potential security risk ahead. Okay, thanks Firefox for trying to look out for me. I'm gonna go to advanced and accept the risk and continue. And I'm presented with a page for rconfig configuration management. So rconfig is a tool that you can use to configure network elements and that kind of a thing. One very helpful thing here is actually it gives me the version information straight away right on the homepage. So thank you, rconfig, for doing that. I am presented with a login prompt, and I currently don't have any credentials, so I don't really know what to do quite yet, right? Except, well, a lot of times there's default credentials for stuff, right? So let's look that up, which is what I did. And let's go. So back here, the rconfig knowledge base has information indicating that the default credentials for rconfig are admin. Well, that would be bad. Nobody would ever do that in any real environments, right? Yeah, they would. So let's try that. And unfortunately, that does not work. So, okay, so I don't have credentials yet. And so let's take a look at maybe our next steps. So I typically will then check EDB or the exploit DB for exploits for something. So for those who might not be familiar with it, if you go to, well, oh, I think I had it open here. If you go to exploit-db.com, it's a repository for a whole bunch of exploits for all sorts of systems. And let me zoom in on that a little bit. For all sorts of systems. So you can see here I've got stuff for CK editor, teacher's record management system. Ooh, that's especially relevant today with all the remote schooling going on, and that kind of a thing, right? So Oh, so complete noob to cybersecurity. There are seriously default credentials to things. Oh boy. So yes, absolutely. A lot of platforms ship with default credentials set up. So you will see that a lot. And actually, if you just look up, for example, rconfig default credentials, you could probably find something like that. There are also lists. I forget which one I had. I had a site bookmarked that had. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Default passwords on cirt.net. So this has, for example, if I'm looking at an Aladdin specific device or an APC device, APC I think makes like power stuff, then I can look here and I will see, okay, the APC AP9606 has, telnet and is running this as a default password. So it's all over the place. I wish I could tell you this doesn't exist in more serious production corporate environments, but it does happen.
It
Sometimes
does.
for convenience, right? You're like, hey, I want the vendor to be able to log in, help us fix issues. I want this to be easy for, we've got a dozen people working on this. I don't want it to be really hard to log into. But unfortunately, that also opens the door for shady characters to look up lists like this and find default logins. So, for example, if you were running, let's say, Cisco equipment, right? Who runs Cisco equipment? Nobody. So I've got default credentials for a Cisco IDS or Cisco Works 2000 and that kind of a thing. So there's a lot of that floating out there, more than you might think, especially being new. So hey, thanks for joining us and thanks for asking about that, because that's sometimes the bane of my existence. I feel like the default creds thing. Um, all right, so back to exploit DB. So exploit DB is available if you're using Kali as a penetration testing platform. It's already on there. You can search. You can use it by just typing in the word searchsploit and looking at all the options. If you're using something like Parrot, you might have to do an apt search for exploit DB, and you'll see I have it installed already. So just install exploit DB, so apt install or sudo apt install exploit DB, and you'll have the same capability to search for. It's really the same as searching on the website, but you have a convenient platform that's there on your machine from the command line, and all the exploit code is actually there on your machine, so you can just quickly copy that to the directory you're working in and modify it as needed, as we will do shortly, and that kind of a thing. So yeah, so just going back to that, so what I did is search exploit for rconfig, right? Since that's what we're working on, and I've got a bunch of results here. Let's go back again to my kind of abridged version of things. I picked the two that I thought were most relevant. So first, I saw there was a remote command injection. Okay, hey, that could be pretty good. We're remote, right? We're not logged into the machine locally, so that might work in injecting commands. That sounds pretty good. Then I had an unauthenticated root remote code execution. Now that sounds really tasty to me, because first of all, it's unauthenticated and I don't have a username and password yet. So I'm unauthenticated. That fits. Okay. Remote code execution. So you might see this referred to as an RCE. If you're around people who are used to security, that's remote code execution. So that means from a remote platform. So I'm just accessing the website. I'm not logged in locally, but I can execute code. That sounds pretty good. So I can execute code like maybe, hey, let's run the ls command and see what's in this directory that we're in on the website, or ID to see who we are. Okay, that's all nice and friendly, but once you get a little more serious, then maybe you'll run something that might send you a reverse shell to your attacking machine, and that's where things get a little more hairy, right? So yeah, hey, let's look at this unauthenticated RCE, because again, that sounds like that's really going to give us a whole lot of access that we don't have right now. Now this unauthenticated RCE, and so let me show you real quick the way to use that with searchsploit in case you haven't used it before. So what I would do is, for example, I have a proving grounds directory set up as PG, and then I have a directory set up for Quackerjack already, and so I might run something like searchsploit rconfig although I already have that in the other pane, but okay. Let's just do that again. And I see that's the unauthenticated root remote code execution. That's 48261. So I can do something like search exploit -p to copy the path of 48261, and then hit enter. And that says it copied this exploit's path to the clipboard. Meaning I can do something like maybe cat and then just paste and paste. And I can see now the code, all the code for the exploit. So I'm not going to go through it quite yet here, but just a quick way to navigate that. You can also copy it to your local directory, like cp the path, and then maybe dot to say copy it here. I already did that, and I don't want to mess with the ones I've already put in, so I'm not going to do that right now. So now that I said that, let's take a closer look at that exploit. And I will say I'm no coding pro. I do dabble with Python stuff here and there. I like Python. It's easy, and since I'm not a coding pro, I like easy. So I do like that. So 48261.py, that's our pal right here. So let's go through that. So all the green text you see here is actually commented out code. So this is all stuff kind of explaining to you what the code does, what it is, and that kind of a thing. And then going down here, you'll see this is the more detailed code. And I'm not going to have you guys all read through all the code, so hopefully it's not too small. But even if so, don't worry about it too much right now. I'll point out some of the important things in a kind of bigger text on the screen here in a second. One thing I thought was really important here in this exploit is it has 3 CVEs listed. So now I know we've got a couple newbies to security here, so you might be wondering what on earth is a CVE. CVE stands for Common Vulnerability or Exposure. What's really important about that is, because that doesn't really tell you anything, does it? Is let's say you find a vulnerability for something. Sorry about that. I don't know why my headset keeps turning off. That is very inconvenient. So hopefully you guys can hear me now, I hope. I'll have to figure that out soon. So, okay, cool. I'm back. Good. There's a little bit of a delay, I think, with the chat. So, all right. So CVE, common vulnerability or exposure. So let's say you find a vulnerability with something, but you've got a whole lot of vulnerabilities floating around for a whole lot of different products. It's good to have one database that has a listing of all of them and has maybe a unique identifier, right? That sounds pretty good. So this is kind of like the, I don't know, maybe driver's license number for this vulnerability, let's say. It's a unique thing. So we can say, I can say to a coworker, for example, hey, we've got an issue with CVE, for example, 2020, 10,220, right? And they can look it up and they will find relevant information on it. How do you find that information? And who keeps track of this database anyway, right? So you can go to mitre.org or cve.mitre.org, and mitre is MITRE. And this is the database that has all the vulnerability information in it. So, well, it looks like that vulnerability, that exploit at least listed CVE, this long number, right? So 2020 meaning it was discovered in 2020, and then the number, it's vulnerability 10,220 found in 2020. So let's search the CVE list here, paste it in there, submit, and we see it here. Okay, returned one result here. You could also search by, let's say, rconfig or something like that, right? And we get some information here. An issue was discovered. The web interface is prone to a SQL injection via this page and a search column parameter and some links and that kind of a thing. So I'm not going to go through all of the details for it right now, but it does give you some relevant information, sometimes a little more than other times. Note that this isn't intended to be like a very super informative. It's not going to tell you how to exploit it, for example, typically. You'll have to find some security researcher's blog, or the actual exploit code actually I think is linked to here. And that's not always the case. If it was, for example, let's say a Red Hat vulnerability, you would find the Red Hat advisory there and that kind of a thing. So, so a lot of useful information there, although not always the information you need to exploit something. So the web interface is prone to a SQL injection. So again, If you're new to security, you might be like, what on earth is a SQL injection? So SQL, or SQL, is structured query language, and that is used for databases to query databases, right? Or to make changes to databases. So, to return information from a database or add information to it, that kind of a thing. A SQL injection specifically means that you're on a website, let's say, that uses a database in some way, and you find a sneaky way to interact with the database kind of in ways that the website author didn't really intend for you to do. So in this case, if we went to the commands.inc.php page on the web server, there's a search column parameter that we can insert a SQL injection into. So in this case, and actually, yeah, Notion is what I'm using for my notes. I think it's super helpful. It lets you keep like a hierarchical um, view of your notes. So for example, here you see I have Quackerjack and I have lessons learned walkthrough. So I keep track of stuff like that. There's a free tier and there's a paid tier. If you're a student, there's also a student tier where you get kind of like the more paid for tier free. So check it out. Or Cherry Tree is another great thing. Cherry Tree is more all offline. I tend to use multiple computers all the time. So I really like having it online because I can use it from my phone or this computer that I'm on or my Windows computer, that kind of a thing. All right, so back to the SQL injection. So this one is kind of easy to read in a little bit, right? I kind of extracted the SQL injection code from the Python code for the exploit, and it says insert into users, and in this case, this is referring to a table called users. So insert into users an ID, a username, a password, a user ID, a user level. So if you're just thinking about this in plain English, forget SQL if you're not familiar with it and that kind of thing. This sounds bad, right? Like I'm inserting into the users table a new username and a new password and a user level and that kind of a thing. That doesn't sound good to me, right? As if I was the web admin, like, oh, that's bad that people can do that to my website, and definitely that is a bad thing here, right? So in this case, what this is doing is creating an administrative user for the website. That's us, and inserting it into the table. So now, remember how I was saying we didn't have credentials? We were unauthenticated. Now we're going to be authenticated, right? So we're going to create that username and password, and it does this by sending this really big, messy looking web request to the server. So I just kind of extracted it again just to have it out by itself to be a little more clear on what it is. All right, so that's actually just the first part of the Python exploit. The second part uses a command execution vulnerability on a file. So a remote authenticated user. So remember, we weren't authenticated at first. Now we should be authenticated after that SQL injection, can directly execute system commands by sending a GET request to this certain PHP file because the path parameter is passed without filtering. So that's an important part of all input that gets put into a website. You have to handle it properly. You have to filter it because users are up to some shady stuff sometimes, and you need to filter what they're doing. So in this case, you can execute system commands like, again, you can be real nice about it and do, oh, ls, id, that kind of a thing. Or you can do something like sending a reverse shell or, hey, just destroy some stuff just because you're angry. I don't know, right? So that sounds bad. Okay. So that's a different CVE that it takes advantage of. And then the third CVE, this one exploit takes advantage of, and this is what I thought was kind of cool, is it strings together three things to finally get us this, in this case, to get us a reverse shell. In this case, it says the install script updates the install script for rconfig updates the etc sudoers file for rconfig specific tasks, and after that, Apache has high privileges for some binaries. So let me take a step back then and explain what on earth is an etc sudoers file, right? So let's say I administered a system, and one of you guys was the actually the link to the editor is actually going to be notion.so, kind of a weird top level domain. I haven't seen it before. So just go to notion.so and you can sign up for it there. So etc sudoers, so let's say I administered a system and I had a bunch of users that needed to do stuff on the system, but I didn't need them to be admins, right? So we have this principle in security called the principle of least privilege. So I'm gonna, like if you've ever watched like some sort of movie that involves, I don't know, government stuff, right? They were like, hey, this is on a need to know basis and you don't need to know, right? And they get kind of that kind of attitude. Well, we take the same attitude in security. Well, this is on a need to do basis and you don't need to do, so I'm not going to let you do it, right? That's what we should do in security. But sometimes, let's say one of my users on the system doesn't typically need to do admin stuff, but sometimes they need to, let's say, create users. Well, a normal user can't do it. So like, okay, I need to kind of let you do admin stuff just for this one task. So I will let you have access to, let's say, the add user function as if you're an administrator. And I'm going to do that by adding you to the sudoers file. Add your username in there, add that specific command in there, and now you can type in sudo add user. So if you did add user, it'd be like, hey, permission denied, get out of here. But now you can do sudo add user and be like, oh, hey, Carlos let you do this. You're all good, right? So so sudo is very, very important for that. And again, the rconfig install makes changes for that. So in this case, this was kind of a cool learning experience for me. Is I was looking at the code that the Python exploit uses, and it's actually you running the zip command. Zip. I mean, I'm not trying to compress or decompress files here, and if I did, like, who cares, right? That was my thinking approaching this, right? But it runs the zip command with this specific parameter, the dash capital T, which is short for dash dash unzip dash command. That's a command you can pass to zip, at least in Linux, that will add a custom unzipping, extracting command. And to be quite honest, I don't know what you would typically use a custom unzip command for, but in this case, they're using it to say, yeah, hey, zip, we're going to run this custom unzipping command, and it's going to just so happen to be this bin sh thing that, hey, don't pay attention to it too much. In this case, it is actually code that bash code that sends a reverse shell to our attacking machine. So that's pretty shady. All right, so now that I've kind of explained the three parts of it, let's just run it. It's actually pretty simple to run. All you do is run Python 3, the name of the All right, sorry about the headset. Sheesh, I really got to figure this out. So Python 3, the name of the exploit.py, the victim's URL, so the victim machine where we found our config. So make sure to include that port 8081, for example, and then our attacker's IP address as well as the attacking port. Or the listening port. So now, again, for anyone who's new, you might be like, hey, what's a listening port? So in this case, for example, a web server will have listening ports on ports 80 and or 443, right? Because that's where it's listening for someone to try to connect and say, hey, oh, you want something from here? Let me give you the website, for example, right? In our case, we're not going to be serving up a website, but we are going to be running a service on there. So first, what I do in Parrot, if I can find that window again, I use a utility called netcat, and tell it that I'm going to listen on port 139. I think that's what I used. Let me copy this code actually here. So I'm going to listen on port 139, and I just hit enter, and it's like, oh, hey, can't do that. You need to have higher permissions. So here's where that sudo command comes in. Sudo 139. I made it so I can sudo without a password. That's not a very secure way to go sometimes, but it's just me and my VM, so I'm good with it. I accept that level of risk. So I'm listening now on 139, meaning that some shady person, or maybe the intended person, can connect to me on port 139 at my IP address. And now I have this code, Python, blah, 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 and all this stuff. Hey, you should connect to me at port 139. Okay, let's hit enter and see what happens. Oh, sorry, that's anticlimactic. I forgot to change directories here. All right, let's try that again. All right. So it says, check your listener. Ooh, that looks promising. And the command was not executed. What? Okay. So let's take a look quick at what this is actually doing. It says it added a temporary admin user. it authenticated as nurse Carla Carvajal, this random, it seems like maybe it randomizes a username. It says it logged in successfully and it's trying to trigger a payload. Okay, that sounds good, but I mean, here's my Netcat listener feeling all lonely and nothing happened. It says to check my listener. I did, it's right here. I didn't get anything. And then it says the command was not executed by the target or you forgot to open the listener. I didn't forget. I mean, come on, you guys saw it, right? Okay. So then it removes the temporary admin user. Oh, it's cleaning up after itself, which is actually very conscientious of this hacker to do. And then it's done. Okay. So it undid all the changes it did. So now we're back to square one. So I was kind of like, okay, well, that's not cool. But I took a second look at the code and I was like, wait, 1 second here. So I have, where's that window? I had 2 vulnerabilities that I found in with Searchploit. One was an unauthenticated remote code execution. The other was a remote command injection, and that one actually required authentication. So I have one exploit that's not working right now, but it seems like maybe the authentication part of it worked. I don't know yet, right? And another one that requires authentication. So since I know a little bit of Python, I definitely know enough to mess around with this fairly simple script. I copied it to a new one called cmdx.py, and I just found the section of code that says removing the temporary admin user, and then it runs another SQL injection to actually remove the temporary admin user it added, and I just commented that out. So I'm like, hey, just don't do that. Like, you added the admin user, like, cool, just leave that there. Don't be a conscientious hacker, and leave that there for me, because I might actually want that in the near future, maybe, right? So I just actually commented that out and left the rest of the code in. So now what the code is going to do is do a SQL injection to add a user, and then it's going to try to do the whole zip thing and stuff like that, and it's going to fail, and I don't really care about that part because maybe it did successfully add an admin user. So I named that one cmdx.py. So let's try that one. Where am I? All right. So we're going to do the same code again. And again, a lot of this is redundant because we know it's going to fail at some of this. And in this case, it did it pretty quick, but it says it authenticated as and and logged in successfully. But I don't trust it because, I mean, some hacker made this, right? So let's double check and see. And by the way, the password admin is hard coded into this exploit. So do that randomized string and admin and hit login and bada bingo. Okay, cool. So so now we have a valid username and password. So we're not there yet, but we're a step closer to there, right? So now let's take a look at that other exploit maybe, right? So this one's a command execution vulnerability. So a remote authenticated user that used to not be us. We used to be unauthenticated, but now we're good. We're authenticated. We can directly execute system commands by sending a GET request to the Ajax archive files.php because the path parameter is passed, again, without filtering. So if you ever make a website and you take user input and you're not filtering, it's bad. It's bad, which can lead to command execution. So, oh, you know what? Nope, I repeated that, didn't I? Let's run. This is the one. Sorry. Okay. This one's a different file, libcrud search crud.php. What a name for a file, right? But again, the node ID parameter is passed directly to the exec function without being escaped. Also kind of like filtered out the way it should be. So in this case, this is the payload that it sends, and the bash command that's kind of hidden in there among all that gunk is this one here. And you guys might recognize that as a bash reverse shell command. So let's try that. So our new username is this one here, that randomized string, the and let's change this back to 139. And I think that's my valid IP address. I'm pretty sure I changed it before we started the stream. Let's see. Nothing like trying stuff out for the first time on a demo. All right, so now I'm running the command injection.py again with the HTTPS and the website port 8081, my username and password, because these are the parameters that this specific exploit requires. And then my attacking IP address. So this is the IP address of my own machine, and then port 139. So I'm listening on 139 still here. And then I'm going to hit enter and boom. Hey, look at this. This looks like connect to, that's me from, that's the victim. I got the victim to connect to me. That is great. So now let's double check though. Like, what's my ID? Who am I here, right? I'm the Apache user. Okay, cool. So I mean, if I run, for example, ID in my own window here, I see my username is Zesk. So okay, so I mean, I kind of sometimes like to do those like checks. It's kind of like pinch me, like, am I dreaming here or what? You know. So yes, I'm Apache. So that's, I don't have an Apache user on my local Parrot machine. So so that's great. So one quick note. Sometimes when you get some of these shells and you try to do like neat stuff like tab completion or something like that, it just doesn't work because and again, to be honest, I don't know like all the ins and outs of why it doesn't work all the time. But for example, let's do ls real quick and we can see files here. And I want to cat, let's see, vendors, but I don't feel like typing that whole file name. I might hit tab here and I just get blank tabs. Okay, well, that's not cool. Or I hit the up arrow and I get all that code, and that's not very helpful either. So I have this pasted at the bottom of all my, like, my template for walking through these machines. There's this Python code you can run that will help with making those shells a little neater. So just run that. And that didn't look like it made a difference, but if you hit Control Z to background that, stty raw -echo, and then FG to foreground that. And I know that sounds complicated, and I kind of dashed through it. But now if I did, for example, cat vendors, oh, hey, tab completion is back, right? And then up arrow, oh, my up arrow, I missed you so much. You're back. Okay, great. So yeah, so that's just helpful as a quality of life improvement when you're running these things. You're like, oh, this is just torture typing things by hand. No tab completion, no, easy history stuff. So yeah, if you ever have watched IPSec on, he does a lot of the Hack the Box walkthroughs. He actually also uses Parrot. He's like, he's really amazing, and he has that whole like Python command. He just like types it like it's nothing. Yeah, I'm not that cool. I don't remember that one by heart. But yeah, he does a lot of stuff like that, and that's where I picked that up. He does that all the time to upgrade his shells. So definitely worth doing that. So now that's great. We've got this initial foothold on this machine. So now we're kind of like, well, what do I do now, right? I mean, I'm looking around, like, where am I? I'm in home, rconfig, www, lib, crud, and there's just really a huge variety of things you can do from here. And I don't want to walk through all the possibilities, but this is what they call the OS enumeration side of things, and there's just a ton of stuff you can do here. Since there is a ton of stuff, I remember, hearing one of my coworkers say something like, if you have to do something like 3 times, then you're doing it wrong, right? Because if you're entering similar commands all the time, like, maybe there's a better way to do it. And he was really referring to automating stuff, maybe writing a script to do something for you, that kind of a thing. So yes. So the left screen is my own environment. So you can see here, my host name is Cotorra, which is actually parrot in Spanish. I just named it that way just because. So yes, that's my attacking side, and then on the right, in the right pane, this is the victim machine that we connected to the server. So all right, so there's a lot of things we can do here. Sometimes I will just run a couple quick things by hand, like, for example, sudo -l. Like, what could I do? Like, does the Apache user have sudo access, for example? hey, it says, hey, it gives you a lecture on using sudo, like be careful, basically, and it requests a password for the user, for the Apache user. But I don't have one, unfortunately. I did get connected as the Apache user, but I don't have a password for them. I connected through some shady means to get it to send me a reverse shell, but I never got a password in the process. The password, username and password we got was only for the website. So that's not going to apply here, right? If we tried like admin, yeah, did that work? Oh, no, does not seem to be working, right? So, okay, so let's kill that. We don't have any sudo access. I don't see any files here. Let's say that, it might be worth taking a look at some of these files. Like, hey, look at that. There's a user admin file. Maybe that's handy. And looking through that, I'm not going to spare you guys that. I didn't find anything helpful there either, right? So, so you may look for some low-hanging fruit like that and see what you can find. In this case, I didn't find anything quite like that. So I turned to some help from someone who wrote an automation script because I didn't feel like writing it. So there's a script called linpeas. So this guy, Carlos Polop, wrote it. And so it has this really cute little P logo with the little Linux headband on it. This one also had some drama surrounding it recently regarding its usage on the OSCP exam. But the lesson for that is be careful of what you run, know what you're running, where you're running it, and that kind of a thing. But I used it in this case. Again, I'm in a test environment against a test machine. It's not terribly like concerning what if I run something that might be a little too aggressive or might do a couple things that I didn't expect it to do. And yeah, I saw that was fixed in the latest version, so that's cool. So hopefully it should be OSCP friendly. I hope so, because whenever I take it, I kind of want to have want to be able to use that, right? But I'll probably just double check it and make sure I confirm what's on the version I'll use on the test and go from there. So linpeas is one of many enumeration scripts. There's also like linenum, and I'm drawing a blank. There's some other ones out there that you can use as well. So I just happened to use linpeas. So let's linpeas, like I said, it does a lot of stuff. So I'm not going to run you guys through all of it because it does take a little while to run, but I can show you the relevant part of what linpeas found. So let's scroll down to find that here. So linpeas did a find /-perm -4000 type F. Like it's a long command. Probably don't need to read it all out. But what this command does is it finds binaries that have the set user ID bit set on the system. So again, newbies might be like, hey, what is that? You're like speaking some other language that is not what I speak. So again, like let's say you were an administrator on a system, you're like, hey, I got all these non-admin peasants on my system. They can't be doing these things. But okay, I need them to run this one command as an administrator, right? Like let's say I need them to be able to edit this one file as an administrator. So I'm going to let them use Vim or Nano or something like that as an administrator. They might set the user ID bit on it, and I'll show you what that looks like. Well, I can show you now, actually. They might set the user ID bit on it so that when someone runs it, it's as if they're running it as root. So it's another way to accomplish kind of the same thing that that sudo does, but in a fairly different way. But basically giving somebody temporary admin permissions. Again, that comes with some dangers, because what if somebody can edit any text file as root? Well, that's, maybe they can edit files to like say add users or delete users, or just straight up delete config files or change config files to add a backdoor to something or something like that, right? So yeah, so that's what the set user ID does, and you can identify that by let me just go switch back to this machine, for example, if I do ls-la, which shows me all files, but more importantly in a list format, and shows some details about the files, you'll see all the permissions here. And I won't go into too much detail explaining all the permissions, but essentially this tells me for the owner of the file what their permissions are, which is they can read and write the file, cannot execute. There would be an X there like that if they could execute. The group that the owner is in, they can read, they can't write, they can't execute, and anyone, so global permissions are just read, no write, no execute. Okay, now the set user ID though, this one will be distinctive in that it's RWS, not X, but S. And so that tells you, hey, whenever somebody runs this, they're going to run it as if they're the owner of the file, and the owner of this file is root. So let me just run that find command, for example, real quick to show you kind of what that looks like. Oh, I can't clear it. Okay, fine. Let me just create some space here. All right, so find, and then basically look for the set user ID bit files, and then it pipes it to xargs. And xargs is kind of cool in that xargs then takes, every bit of output from this find command and supplies it as an argument for ls-lahtr. So first, you know what? Let me run it without the xargs command to show you guys what that looks like. And so it gives me a list of files. Okay, usr bin find, chage, gpassword, blah, 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 right? So, okay, but now with the xargs, we see, okay, we get a little more information here. We get basically all the ls, la, htr information for each file, which is more helpful, in my opinion, for something like this where you really want to verify that. So now if you're new to security, you might look at something like this and be like, well, I mean, that's a lot of stuff, and I don't really know what's what here. And it takes some time. Sometimes there's just no getting around. You just have to be exposed to it and use stuff and get used to which ones are legit files to have the set user ID bit set, right? Like password, for example. That sounds like, oh man, maybe that shouldn't have it, but yes, it does need to have it, or mount, or sudo, or that kind of a thing. Those are the usual suspects, and we're like, okay, we can ignore those a little bit. But in this case, find is not a usual suspect, and want to see, can we do anything sketchy with find? Now, find is a utility used to find files on the system, right? Like if I wanted to find a file here in this directory by the name, I don't know, what kind of files did we have here? Find here dash name, and then we'll say wildcard vendors. Like, oh, hey, look, we found that file, right? I mean, that dumb headset. That doesn't look like, I mean, okay, I can find stuff. Maybe I can find files that that I'm not supposed to be able to find, but you can actually take things a little bit further. And I think I saw somebody mention GTFO bins before. Is that right? Did somebody do that? So
Yes, actually, Cyber Lola mentioned that.
yeah. So this is where I went. So GTFO bins, if you guys haven't been there, is so it's a list of Unix binaries, as it says here. Basically, it's saying, hey, if you can execute this file, then here are some suggestions for ways that you can exploit it. And it has a very big list of binaries on Linux. And so in this case, for example, let's look for find. And so for find specifically, it's like, hey, if you are in maybe a restricted environment or a restricted shell, you can use this to get out of it. If the set user ID bit is set, maybe you can use this. If you can sudo find, so if you were added to the sudoers find, with sudoers file for find, maybe you can do this. So this middle case is that's what fits our specific scenario right now. And so let's try that. And so, all right, so here's another thing. I could have typed find in the search bar. You are right, Cyber Lola. But I was so lazy that I did more work to find it. That's how that goes sometimes. So, so copying and pasting stuff from the internet. is dangerous. Understand what you're copying and pasting, right? So in this case, right, so let's say, oh, let's copy this command because this looks really helpful, right? And I pasted it in here, and it's like, oh, no such file or directory, right? Because in this case, it has just the // in front of find. And in this case, that's fairly safe and an innocuous sort of mistake. But yeah, be aware of of what you're copying and pasting. Understand why it's running what it's running. And in this case, really what's happening here is that we can tell find to execute a command, and we're going to tell it to execute bin sh, or basically the bash shell. And since we are root technically when we're running on it, since we have the set user ID bit set, if we open bash with find, then we're opening bash as root, which means we should be maybe root, maybe. Let's see. So we're going to run that, and I kind of wish that computers would give you like a little like fireworks effect, or have people cheering at you when you get root. But really what you're looking for is this little pound symbol. That's like your fireworks right there. Like you see that, you're like, yes, I got it, right? So if we wanted to confirm, like Cyberlola said, who am I? I am root. So instead of I am Groot, I am root. So yay! So we got it. And in this case, we could confirm that. For example, like, okay, am I like for really real root though? Like, how do I confirm that? One easy thing is, for example, there's the etc shadow file, which you should not be able to access unless you're root. And oh, look, lo and behold, we can access it and see root's password hash. So okay, cool. So we're definitely root on this system. So usually, okay, yeah, you're kind of like, that's where it ends, right? But I kind of went back on this a little bit and I was like, why didn't that first exploit work anyway? Because I ran it and it's like it partially worked, but it partially didn't. And I kind of wanted to find out why that failed. So I took a quick look at, all right, so we went through, so the username and password part seems like it worked, right? Because I used that in a later step. The command execution part, I don't really know. And then there's the etc sudoers part. That one's maybe one I can check out. So I checked out. So let's see. So the sudoers file is actually Cyberlola. So the proof is in. So if I did like ls root, you'll see there's a proof.txt. So almost the same thing. So I can do cat root proof.txt, and there you go. These are dynamically generated. So if you signed up for this, don't try my flag. It's not going to work. And then I don't know. Offensive security might slap you on the hand for using somebody else's hash or something. But anyway, so I wanted to. So the sudoers file is in the location etc sudoers, and I'm looking at this here, and kind of like, all right, I don't really see anything very unusual in this sudoers file. So I took another look at the install script, right? Because the vulnerability said specifically, let me see if I can find it here. It said the install script updates the etc sudoers file for rconfig specific tasks. Okay, let me download that install script, right? So I found the install script for that version, and that link is here. And I took a look at the modification. I took a look at the install.sh file and just looked for sudoers in there, and then so I saw this code here. So echo again, for anyone new, meaning just like, hey, just repeat this, right? And in this case, it's actually sending it to a file. It's adding it to the end of a file that's declared by a variable log file, and it's adding all this information to that file. So rconfig specific Apache configuration, Apache, all no password, all that stuff, right? And so it adds a bunch of stuff like cron tab, zip, chmod, chown, who am I, wc, tail, rm. So it adds a lot of stuff to it. But if I look through the one on my machine, so let's see, cat etc sudoers pipe, and then let's grep or search for Apache, because I had that in there. And I have no instances of Apache in the sudoers file. So that's kind of weird. That's not standard according to their installation. But that's somehow sometimes how offensive security rolls. So they will make it so certain exploits, especially common ones, don't quite work. Either you have to change your exploit script or you have to do something else to get it working. In this case, I had to kind of combine it with a different exploit and get that working. So just something to keep an eye out for, because a system administrator could very well do the same thing. They could say, install our config and say, hey, you know what? I don't really like adding all this stuff here, because actually, if we look at the list of all the stuff Apache can run, I mean, cron tab, that means it can like set up cron jobs, which are repeating tasks. That sounds like that could be abused. Zip, I didn't know zip could be abused, but it sure can. You can change permissions on a file, change the owner of a file. You can just delete stuff with RM. I mean, for somebody who's looking to be destructive, that's just bad, right? But the administrators in this case did the right thing for them, the wrong thing for us, and removed that from the sudoers file. So we had to kind of find a different way around it. So that's why that first exploit didn't work. Presumably, maybe that second CVE for the command execution actually did work, but we don't know because the sudo zip part never worked. So essentially the second and third parts are useless. The first CVE did work and the second two probably didn't. But then again, by combining that with a different exploit, we were able to get that to work anyway. So so I think that's it. Hopefully that helps kind of explain why that first exploit failed. Sometimes I kind of like to know that, because it's like, did I do something wrong? Did I listen on the wrong port or something like that? And then, again, that's another thing on offensive securities boxes. A lot of times they don't let you just connect to some random high number port, which I usually do. But instead I had to go to, since I knew, let's take a look, scroll back up, and we see, okay, well, this box is running Samba, so it's using ports 139 and 445, so it should have access to connect out there, right? So that's why I used port 139, because like, okay, that should work at least. So that's why I use that, whereas usually I'm running like some random high port, and in this case, it just didn't connect. Even when I had the things that did eventually work on the high ports, it did not. So that's another thing to keep an eye out for, both in capture the flag environments. Sometimes maybe when you're running ports 1337, because I'm so elite, that might not work because they might have blocked that port. Because they're trying to block, again, using the principle of least privilege, block ports that the machine doesn't need to connect to. And I think that's about it. So there are different ways to go about this box, actually, because their walkthrough, offensive securities walkthrough, actually used slightly different methods for both the initial foothold and the privilege escalation from the ones I found. But sometimes there's just more than one way to skin a cat, and that's how it goes. So so that's it for this box, and open up to any questions, comments, anything like that.
Yeah, awesome job. Really cool.
I see a lot of thanks, and you're very welcome. I'm glad to be able to present here, and I'll stop sharing actually for now.
Yeah, you covered a lot of stuff in a little over an hour.
So Cyberlola, yeah, I know that feeling sometimes. That's frustrating when you think you did what you need to and then it doesn't work. It's no good. So hey, glad you guys enjoyed it. Seems like, at least from the feedback I'm seeing, you did. So cool. If you guys have any questions ever, I'm on the Pwn School Slack all the time, so feel free to reach out. Either tag me in a general thing or direct message me or whatever. I'd be happy to talk.
Awesome walkthrough. Thanks
And
everyone
Phil,
for joining.
I don't hear you. Maybe my audio is wrong.
Can you hear me? Yeah, let's see. Can anyone else hear me? Yeah, I don't know. I got my mic is not muted. It was muted a while ago. Okay, so they said they can hear both of us. Okay.
Oh, that's my issues then.
Well, thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining. And we will see you everyone next month. Oh yeah, shout out to my neighbor. One of my neighbors joined us tonight. I noticed him on there. Good to see you on here.
Why can't I hear Phil? This is so frustrating.
Maybe it's
So
something
anyway,
your
though,
ear.
I hope it's okay to answer this question from OS3 Eri.
Sure.
So for internal pen testing, we do a little bit of everything. We have all sorts of stuff, but web apps are all over the place, everywhere. So we do end up testing a lot of web applications. It just so happens our environments are mostly Linux, so or a very good portion of them are. So a lot of Linux stuff, a lot of web app pen testing stuff, and yeah, that's that. And I absolutely do find that working on these machines helps. And this is something I feel like you find more and more as you study more different things. You find that stuff overlaps, and you're like, hey, I just so happens I read about this yesterday, and I'm coming across it today, and it's so cool to see those kind of coincidences line up, and that happens all the time. I feel like with boxes that I work on, let's say on Hack the Box or proving grounds, and then I get to get to work, and I'm like, oh, I have to do this thing that's kind of similar. That's pretty cool. So yeah. And actually, I don't really have a Twitter handle that I that I use. I created one and follow like two people, like two random organizations. So basically, you don't really have one that has anything on it as of right now. Maybe I should do that at some point.
Yeah. And we have a Slack channel, which we may be moving to Discord, but we've had that up since 2018. So here's the invite for Slack. So if you want to join Slack, Carlos is on there. So Carlos is on Slack. So you can see him there. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining. I guess if no one else has any questions,
Oh,
someone asked for LinkedIn. If you want to share that.
sorry, I'm really sorry, Phil, but I can't hear you still.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't know why. So I'm hoping I'm not talking over you or anything like that. Let me. I can link. I can find my LinkedIn and link it real quick here.
Yeah, I probably will be going to Discord. It's just so many, whenever we start out, even Trusted Sec had a Discord, had a Slack channel. So everyone just been moving to Slack. So yeah, we'll probably move over. We'll just have to kind of do like hacking is not a crime. They kind of did a phased approach.
All
So
right. So just sent the link for for my LinkedIn. So definitely feel free to connect to me there. And if you want to reach me there, I think in my profile picture I had much shorter hair. So if you don't recognize me, that's why.
okay. So thanks everyone for joining. See everyone next month.